everybody. I'm Karen Hartglass. You're listening to It's All About Food. Thank you so much for joining me today. My guest is Gregory Berns, MD, Ph.D., who is the Distinguished Professor of Neuroeconomics in the Psychology Department at Emory University, where he directs the Center for Neuropolicy and Facility for Education and Research in Neuroscience. He pioneered the use of brain imaging technologies to understand human motivation and decision-making. Now, he uses MRI techniques to study the brains and minds of both humans and a wide range of other animals. Dr. Berns is the author of What It's Like to Be a Dog, the New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller, How Dogs Love Us, Iconoclast, Satisfaction, and the Self Delusion. Dr. Berns and his wife live on a farm outside of Atlanta with several dogs, chickens, and some very special cows. And we'll be talking about those cows because Dr. Berns has a new book out called Cowpuppy. Welcome to It's All About Food.
Hey, it's great to be here.
Okay, so first, this podcast, like I said, is called It's All About Food. Your book is not necessarily about food, but it is about cows that many consider food. So it's definitely appropriate on this program, and we love talking about animals.
Yeah, that's right. My cows, we'll get into it, I guess, are not food products on our farm, nor do they produce dairy. They're actually miniature cows. So usually the question I get when people visit the farm is, what are they for?
Yes. And I think we'll find that out over the course of this conversation.
That's right. I hope so.
But first, I want to know, why did you become a neuroscientist?
Ooh, well, I guess that goes way back. I've been an academic my whole career, so probably almost 30, 40 years. I guess the best way to explain what kind of scientist I am is I've always been fascinated with how the body works, whether it's just the physical part of how our bodies work as machines, or how our brains work and how that gives rise to all the mental functions and emotions that we experience. And then over the years, that kind of migrated from humans, because most of my career was studying the human brain and how the human brain makes decisions. And then that started moving into how other animals' brains work and how they think, what they feel, and can we use modern technologies to essentially decode what it's like to be another animal.
And is that to understand, like you said, what it's like to be another animal, or does it help us understand us in some ways, or a little both?
I think it's probably a bit of both. But from my perspective, I'm less concerned with the applications to humans and more really just fundamentally understanding how other animals think, because of course they can't speak to us in language like we use. I mean, obviously they communicate with us, but it's very challenging to decode that, with deep understanding. And that's kind of where my focus has been really for the last 15 years.
It's a great field. I like to say, I don't know how other humans think. I only know how I think. And so it's a whole nother level when you're talking about another species.
That's absolutely correct. And I sometimes use that example too. It's a little easier with humans because we assume that, how whatever our internal experience is similar to other people. And basically that's how we function as human beings, is, we use our internal monitor of what we're thinking and use that to kind of model and project it onto other people. Most of the time it works, but obviously it's not 100% correct because we make mistakes all the time. But that's what language is for. And we have the ability to share those thoughts and correct them. We don't have that possibility with other animals, though.
Have you tested yourself with these MRI techniques? Because you'll know what you're thinking when you see the reaction. Just curious.
Yeah, I've probably been in the scanner probably about 50 or 100 times.
Okay. But have you, I'm just wondering, did that help you connect any dots since you knew what you were thinking when you were being scanned?
Not really.
Yeah, okay.
Not really. And it's funny because I teach a class every year where I introduce undergraduates to using MRI to essentially do functional MRI so that they can understand how the technique works to study brain function. And as part of that class, they essentially scan each other, so they become participants in their own experiments.
Mm.
And initially, they get very excited about going in the scanner and seeing what their brain looks like, and that's usually followed when they get out and look at it, and it's like, oh, uh and it's because the brain doesn't have any sensation of its own. You if you open up a skull and you poke it, you won't feel anything. That's what neurosurgeons do.
Mm.
And so when you see it, because it has no sensation and it's essentially hidden to us, it looks like a foreign object and you have no relationship to your brain, which is very strange. And when students, that kind of dawns on them, it's a bit of a letdown.
Kind of, you can't cuddle up to your mind.
Well, I mean, the mind is a construction made by the brain, but the machine itself is kind of opaque to us.
Hmm.
It's very strange.
Well, life can be considered strange as we try and figure it out. Okay. I just want to talk a minute about scientists in general and history and our relationship with animals. I think it was Descartes who had said that animals didn't have souls. And I'm wondering if you think that led us down a certain path. Science is supposed to be objective, but clearly we put our own beliefs and culture into the work that we do and our interpretations and perceptions. And so when we went down this path of thinking that maybe animals didn't feel pain or animals didn't have souls, how did that affect our work in science?
Yeah, you're right. It did begin with Descartes. He thought that non-human animals were automatons, and essentially just kind of reflex machines. And that was the kind of prevailing opinion amongst academics through much of the 20th century. Um, even the behaviorists like Pavlov and Skinner, um, essentially, it's not that they didn't believe that there were kind of internal states to animals, but they dismissed them scientifically as unreachable and unstudyable and just focused on externally observable behaviors, because it's like, well, you can't ask an animal how they feel. And so they just dismissed it as not possible to study. Um, some of the philosophers of the 19th century, so some of the utilitarian philosophers, Bentham and Mill in particular, were kind of the first ones to push back against that. And it started in Britain, really, with the animal rights movement. And, I think it was Bentham who said, the question is not, whether they can feel, but whether they suffer. And they clearly do. But that was more of a philosophical statement, not a scientific one, that people had studied really until probably 1980s, 1990s, maybe even 2000s, where people really started taking this seriously academically. And, I mean, there's kind of a long history of using animals in biomedical research, and I say using in the most reductionist terms. You look first dogs, and then later other animals, and still to this day rats and mice in particular, but also along the way, lots of primate casualties were essentially used as tools to study how the body functions, and that's it. That has changed. It is changing slowly, though.
Yeah, a lot of pain and suffering went down. during those experiments to many different animals, unfortunately. And probably because, well, as I said before, I don't know how people think except for myself. And I don't know what these scientists were thinking when they were doing those things. Perhaps some of them enjoyed it, and perhaps some of them tuned it out, and perhaps some of them truly believed that animals didn't feel anything. I don't know, but I'm glad we're moving in a better direction.
Yeah, well, I think we're moving there, and and as I kind of found myself on a farm, the exact same questions and issues come up when you're talking about livestock and farm animals and other animals that are used in different ways. I think it's exactly the same issues.
I agree. You talk about personality traits and define them with humans and with animals. And I just wanted to list what you call the big five because I thought they were interesting. There's agreeableness, aggressive versus peaceful, openness, which is curious versus uncurious, boldness, bold versus shy, activity, active versus inactive, and extroversion, extrovert versus introvert. Now, personally, when it comes to people, I don't like things like Ayurveda, for example, which like to describe people by their personality and their physicality and decide what you're going to eat based on those things. And there might be some science behind it. I'm not convinced by it for the most part, but I don't like being put in a box that way and characterized. But I understand in science, we need to measure things and we need to be able to understand things. And so we make categories, and it's convenient and useful to some extent, I imagine. Where does caring fit in as a trait? Some people wouldn't think of an animal as caring. Dog lovers and cat lovers might think their animals are. Does that fit into any one of those five? I didn't quite figure that out.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I guess it kind of, the difficulty with these terms is that they are words that have different meanings in different contexts and to different people, right? So and you're right. So you listed those terms that I've used to describe cow personalities, and I use those because that is one of the most common ways to describe human personalities. There are many others, and I think, to be clear, what we mean by personality is an individual, whether it's a person or an animal, their tendency to behave and act in consistent ways that seem to be stable across the lifespan. So take kind of ones that I think most people can relate to most easily is extroversion and introversion. And there's been a lot written about, especially, okay, I'm an introvert, which means, there are different ways to describe it. It's like, do you like to go out and party? Do you like to be the center of attention? Or would you prefer to be in kind of one-on-one conversation, et cetera, et cetera. So I think people relate to that, there's kind of continuums and these are spectrums. But by and large, I would call myself an introvert. I do not like to socialize in groups. And so fine, I accept that. Caring, I guess it depends on what you mean. Does that, there are different ways that psychologists kind of incorporate that. One common one would be like a measure of what we would call sociopathy, sociopathy, kind of the opposite of caring would be a sociopath who doesn't care about anybody else. And so I think we all kind of recognize that these words describe attributes of people that do tend to be stable over time. And really the issue is, okay, well, what's the best way to describe that? How do you measure it? Is it based on questionnaires? Is it based on behavior? That doesn't particularly concern me. I'm more interested in, it's like, okay, well, what about animals? So a lot of psychologists would say, well, how do you how can you measure personality in an animal? You can't give them a questionnaire. Um, but anyone who's had a pet, especially if you've had multiple pets, multiple dogs, multiple cats, easily recognizes that they are different. They behave differently and they do it in consistent ways, right? So, some will approach strangers and just kind of love everyone, and others will hold back. I mean, those are personality traits. So it's just a matter of how we want to describe it and how you want to define it.
And paying attention.
Paying attention to what other people say.
No, well, you said those people that are around animals, when you have a dog, when you have a cat, and even if you spend time with a cow and you spend time like you have with your wonderful stories in this book, you see they are all individual. You see they have unique personalities. You see that they can find joy and they can be distressed. They can be agitated. They can be happy. They can be playful. They can be so many different things like us, which is something we've pushed back on for a long time. And it makes sense to me that life is like life on this planet. It's more likely that we're like other species than not like other species. At least that's the way my mind thinks.
Yeah. And I kind of encountered this. So when for the previous to cows, I spent most of my days studying how dog brains work. And I would encounter kind of the same thing. We would do these studies in these dogs we trained to go in the MRI scanner, and we'd write academic papers, and then they would get picked up in the popular press. And it's like, oh, your dog loves you, or oh, your dog does this, right? As if all dogs were the same. Like dog is a unifying thing. And I would give talks, and people would ask me, it's like, well, how do you know my dog? Does my dog really love me? And I would say, look, I don't know you, and I don't know your dog. Um, there's no guarantee. Just like people, it's like, how do you know your spouse loves you? Uh,
That's good.
there are good fits, and there are some that probably shouldn't be together.
Okay, so you've written Cowpuppy, An Unexpected Friendship and a Scientist's Journey into the Secret World of Cows. And you worked as a neuroscientist, and then you and your wife decided you wanted to have a sustainable farm, and you found yourself mowing the lawn a lot, or mowing your property quite often. And that took a lot of time. And
That's right.
your intelligent decision was to get some ruminants, get some cows to feed on that, and that would be their purpose. And it's funny because I just interviewed the author and professor Julie Guthman, who wrote a new book called The Problem with Solutions. And she focused mostly on Silicon Valley's solutions to food insecurity, which, in her opinion, and I agree with her, are mostly a disaster. They're not solving the problem of distribution and the real problems of hunger. Okay. But what she discovered is that solutions beget problems. And it made me think of your situation. So you got a farm, you had a mow, and you got the cows to solve that problem. And then this whole book ensued.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, this is probably a problem of hubris, right? That, we humans think that we understand nature and have a solution to the problems of our own making. I fully agree with that. My problem is a minor problem, right? I moved to a farm. I'm fortunate enough that I was able to do that, and found myself in, honestly, what people here call God's country. It is beautiful. And so I had about 15 or so acres of pastures that were previously used as a horse farm, without kind of a clear idea of what I was going to do with this land. Initially, I thought, well, I'll grow vegetables. And that was very poorly thought out, because I had spent a good portion of my pandemic time taking online courses in farming, mostly from the Cornell Small Farms program, which puts out wonderful classes,
Mm.
on getting started in farming. Uh, but even while doing that, and even after moving here, I kind of quickly realized that that really wasn't in my DNA to do that. Growing things initially was fairly easy. I live in a semi-tropical climate, and things grow pretty well here in Georgia. Um, the problem, though, of course, was then, as actually you just point out, is like, well, what do you do with the stuff you produce? Um, what was I going to do? Go set up a stall at the farmer's market? That didn't really appeal to me, especially the introvert in me. Didn't want to do that. Look, I was an animal guy. I've always loved animals. And so it's like, okay, well, this property really demands some kind of animal that can live on it in a natural way. And so that leads you to ruminants. And honestly, it was the existing fencing that dictated what kind of animal without having to build more fencing or other kinds of fencing. Uh, it kind of came down to cattle.
Well, I don't know how spiritual you are or how you feel you have that much free choice, but I wonder if this was something you were meant to do and learn from these cattle, um, to go on and further your work.
My neighbor thinks so. My neighbor, who figures prominently in the book,
Ken,
is, yeah, Pastor
Pastor
Ken.
Ken.
Pastor Ken, now retired, but he was a pastor at the biggest church in the county that I moved to, um, and he's convinced that that a higher power brought us together, um, with some purpose. Um, I don't know how to respond to that, other than the fact that I think it's been the best thing I've ever done, both for me, uh, both as a learning experience on how things actually work. Um, as an academic, I've spent my life in the ivory tower. Um, that's a very kind of peculiar, sheltered environment with its own weird set of cultural norms. Um, and moving to the country, rural life, learning how food actually is grown and how difficult it is, and all the things that go into it, and kind of just the random, uncontrollable aspects of nature. Um, and then, learning to talk to people, uh, honestly, has been the best thing for me. The cows, to me, have been the catalyst for that.
They've been the cowlist. Bad pun. I, as I mentioned before, I enjoyed reading your book. There are just wonderful stories, and you have, I don't know how to describe it. It's this beautiful openness and curiosity and caring for these animals that you're getting to know and love. And it's definitely a give and take between you and them, and the relationships are just delightful. And then at the same time, as you tell us a brief story, you interject a little of your neuroscience in there, and it's enough to make it understandable and palatable, because some people, they just want to be entertained and they don't want to read the science. But I like science, but I like that balance, understanding a little bit of what was going on. But I really appreciated your openness and your curiosity with these animals, which we don't get on a CAFO, a very large farm where animals are considered objects, for example, and that's a serious problem.
Well, I appreciate that. I do. This is, I'm trying to tell folks, this is actually my sixth book. And I think to me, it's my best. It's the one that's the most heartfelt. It's, it's not easy to write what you feel, if that makes any sense. Um, but I did my best to just kind of, put it out there. Uh,
There was a lot of sweetness, a lot of, as you said, it was heartfelt. Definitely, you succeeded.
well, thanks. And so then I guess then the question is, well, okay, well, why read it then? Um, hopefully it's entertaining. It's
It's
not.
great storytelling. That's why. And personally, from my point of view, not to cut you off, but I did, sorry, is that I think we can learn a lot from this book, especially people that are so separated from animals, even if they have live with a pet, a dog or a cat or a bird or something. We need to know more about the animals that we consider food, and we need to know that they feel pain, that they love each other, that they have friends and family, and they care about each other, and they're very much like us. And maybe they're different in ways that we can learn from.
Yeah, I guess, the question is, well, why did I write this book? I mean, um, there were several reasons. One, because I fell in love with the cows,
It's a
and
love story.
it is a love story. And and I just wanted to share that. And there's that part of it. There's also the part of city boy moving to the country, and so there's the green acres aspect to it.
Privileged city white boy moving to the country.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. And so hopefully many of your listeners are old enough to know the show Green Acres.
right.
um, uh, there's a bit of that, and actually there's a fair bit of that.
Except your
That
wife isn't Ava Gabor.
right. That's right. No. um, but there's this, we currently in this country have this huge disconnect between urban areas and rural areas, and I have a much better appreciation for why that is the way it is. And so things that I have learned living in the country, have found many things here uh, that I didn't have living in the city. Uh, having neighbors actually that I know and talk to at length, um, and finding that I have more friends here than I ever did living in urban areas. I mean,
And
that
they don't live as close to you as they did in the urban environment, right?
no, but I know them better.
Right. Interesting. Yeah.
Uh, and you find that, despite political differences, those don't really make that doesn't really matter. What matters is the things that we all care about, which is, community, having people you can depend on, helping each other out when you need help. And that's all in the book. And like I said, the cows are a big part of it, but it's really more than just the cows. And kind of me giving back to the community is people come and see these animals, and they say, oh wow, I didn't know that cows were like that, or that they can roll over for belly rubs and act like dogs. um, and so it kind of, my view is it's not, the book is not a polemic. um, it's storytelling in a way that I hope just like will make people go, oh, I didn't know that.
Okay. So speaking of things I didn't know, and the book is filled with lots of little things that are interesting that most people don't know. You wrote that dogs eat what humans eat. And this show is called It's All About Food. I like talking about food. So that was an interesting tidbit. And that's how we got closer to dogs, or that's what you surmise or others have done.
Yeah, because I studied dogs and still interested in them, and dogs were the first animal to be domesticated, and it's an ongoing debate over how exactly that happened because it predates the written word, so there's no document that says, hey, this is how wolves turned into dogs. But we know some critical things. One is the diet. So wolves, of course, are carnivores, and prehistoric humans were omnivores, so they could eat many things. But critically, the wolves could and humans, those early humans, could share the same food, and it's likely that the wolves started hanging around human encampments, feeding off of their scraps, and then they also evolved genes that could actually digest carbohydrates. So dogs have the ability to digest carbohydrates. Cats don't, but dogs do. And that probably played a big factor in why they started hanging around. They also have the ability to follow humans because humans, of course, were always moving around for a long time. So one of the points I make in the book is, food is so central to human culture. It may be the most important thing historically and currently. We share meals together, and that is how people bond and culture develops over what we eat. And so the ability for a dog or proto dog, whatever you want to call it, to share in that is, I think, critical in terms of how dogs came into human culture and why they were the first animal to do that. So then you then compare that to other animals. So it's kind of interesting, right? Because wolves are not known to be friendly. The problem with that is that modern wolves are not friendly. The modern wolves are descended from whatever the common ancestor of dogs and wolves was, and the population basically split into modern wolves, which were the animals that wanted nothing to do with humans, and then the dogs, which were the wolves who liked hanging around. So then you realize, well, okay, how many other animals out there are there that we can share meals with? Not many, not many. So the ruminants, which would be cattle, horses are not technically ruminants, but they're kind of a bit like that. We can't eat the same food, and so that limits the time that we spend together. Really, you can sleep with a dog because the dog's digestive system is slow and they don't poop in the bed. Not really true with a ruminant.
Speaking of sleep, you have a whole discussion about cows and sleep and how they don't sleep very much. How
Yeah,
is that possible?
beats me. I mean, there are mysteries in the animal world that we don't understand. I mean, you look at marine mammals like dolphins and whales. The way they sleep is still not totally clear, right? Because they're underwater, and so they have to kind of surface periodically. But the few studies in cattle that I could find on sleep patterns suggest that they sleep 3, maybe 4 hours in total every 24 hours, and that's including during the daytime. And when they do sleep, it's only for about 5 minutes at a time. They literally take cat naps or cow naps. And I have cameras set up on my pasture, and so I noticed this right away after I put the cameras up when I would check in on them at night, and I'd see every time I looked at them, I'd see their eyes, the reflections of their eyes, kind of just like looking around. It's like, gosh, they never sleep.
The cow cam idea sounds really fascinating. The way you can visualize so many different things, and because cows' lives are slow, you can speed up the cow cam and kind of see when there's some activity. That's really fascinating. I know that as humans, we appreciate this technology when we have babies or when we have senior adults. I had 7 cameras on my mom in her house to watch her, make sure she didn't fall or need help and whatever. And they're really very useful. And you learned a lot from them with the cows.
Yeah, I think if most people, if they've had any encounters with cows, have probably just been driving by them on a rural road, and they just kind of dot the landscape like they're just objects out there. And I think that's part of what's kind of the misperception about cows comes from, is that they don't seem particularly active, and therefore, we humans equate that as being dumb. That in fact they're very active. Their pace to life, though, is slower. They don't generally need to move very fast unless they're being chased and they feel like they're in danger. And then you can be sure they can move, for sure. But most of the time, they're not. And so putting the cameras up let me see patterns that I couldn't see before. You speed up the recordings, and it's like, oh, they're doing things. They coordinate their activities. They decide where to graze, and they do it in a very coordinated fashion. Then they lie down and rest and digest their food, and then they get up and do it. And then you can also see kind of the relationships that emerge in the herd, who's closer to each other, and kind of who's actually the boss. It's not the bull, and those sorts of things.
You wrote somewhere in the middle of the book, I think, that cows aren't particularly intelligent or trainable, and you talked about trying to train them. Do you really think that?
I wouldn't say that I said they were not intelligent. There are challenges in training them in ways that we train dogs. So some of them I have 10 now. I started with 3. There's a couple of challenges to training them. One is the fact that they're herd animals, and so they don't like to be separated from each other at all. That probably causes more distress than anything. So when I try to train them, I can't kind of take one individual. I can't take, say, BB. BB's my number 1 cow puppy. It's hard for me to take him aside and just work with him individually like you might do with a dog. So there's that challenge. There's kind of the question of, are they actually responding to verbal commands? I've seen enough videos on the internet of they do, some do, and historically, when cattle or oxen are used to pull carriages or plows, I mean, those are trained. They understand left and right. So it is possible to train them. Part of the other difficulty is that you have to do it individually, and then how do you reward them? Usually in animal training, we focus on positive reinforcement these days, which usually means, a food treat. One of the challenges with ruminants is they're surrounded by food. There's grass all the time. So they are not starving. And so, I have to find something that they really like, that
Candy.
they don't have already.
They like candy.
They do reportedly have a sweet tooth. I've heard people say they like cupcakes and things like that. I don't feed mine cupcakes.
You give them cattle cubes that have
Give them
molasses
cattle
on
cubes,
them.
which are pressed alfalfa pellets. Yeah, they seem to like that.
A smart choice. You had a whole experiment with mirrors, which was delightful to read about. And at the same time, in another place, you talk about memory and how cows can discriminate pictures of herd mates. And I was kind of curious about what they can discern, what they recognize. So pictures work for them, but mirrors are a little more challenging.
Yeah, there has not been a whole lot of research into the cognitive abilities of cattle. And so anything I say is kind of based either just on my observations or the limited literature, because, honestly, people haven't been interested in it. Hopefully that will change. So there have been studies where people have showed pictures to cows, and they do seem to be able to discriminate pictures of other cows that they know and other people that they know. That's pretty impressive, because I don't think that that's been shown that dogs can do that. Certainly in my experiments with dogs, we never really found kind of that ability. And we did many of those things where we showed pictures of their owners to the dogs while we were scanning their brains. And we never found any evidence that they extracted from a two-dimensional image what it represented. And that's part of the difficulty with pictures. There's very few animals that can do that. In part because, I mean, if you think about it, a picture is just a two-dimensional thing that we understand to represent the real thing. But you show that to an animal, and it's not clear how they will process that, because for one, it's going to be much smaller than whatever the picture is of. And many animals, kind of size is kind of like the first visual dimension that is important to them. Is it big or is it small? If it's big, it can hurt them. If it's small, they can eat it. Something like that. Mirrors, though, are a little different, because a mirror is real life
Actual size and motion.
Exactly. And of course, anyone who has a dog or a cat knows that they behave in all sorts of weird ways when you put them in front of a mirror. Yeah. I've never seen, either a dog or a cat kind of show what we would call self-recognition. They might play with it, they might bark at it, or they usually eventually just ignore it. And so none of these things had been done with cattle. And so I thought it would be fun to put up a giant mirror in my pasture and see what happens. It took a while. So part of the problem with mirror experiments with animals is, unlike humans essentially grow up from infancy with mirrors. And so from a very early age, humans get accustomed to seeing their reflections. And soon, very soon, usually by about 12 to 18 months old, they recognize that that's them. That's very clear. Animals, of course, do not have that opportunity, especially wild animals and ones that live outside. So you have to give it time. And so I left this mirror up for months in the pasture to give them plenty of opportunity to interact with it and figure it out. Some of them actually began to use the mirror in ways that suggested like they understood it, meaning that they would walk up to the mirror, some of them would stare at it for a long time. Sometimes they would look behind it to try to see what animal that was.
That was smart, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then some of I won't say the smarter ones, but we'll say the smarter ones then began to use the mirror like it functions, meaning that I saw, and I have on camera, they'd be looking in the mirror, and then another cow would approach from behind, and then they'd see it in the mirror and turn around and look what was behind them. So that means that they used the reflection and understood that it wasn't through the mirror, but it was behind them. That's a big deal.
Yeah. Well, maybe if they were exposed to mirrors as we are from early on, they would figure it out at some point.
Probably. I think a lot of it's just experience and giving them opportunity to explore at their own pace.
But certainly we like to make tests to understand if animals think like we do, because we only understand how we think. But animals clearly have intelligence to do things that we have either no sensitivity for or ability for, and we can't even test for it. At least I don't know that we can, because we don't have those abilities, and we kind of put them aside and say, oh, they're just dumb, but they're just meant to do other things.
Yeah, and this is kind of an old philosophical question. Philosopher Thomas Nagel wrote an essay called "What It's Like to Be a Bat," which I actually vehemently disagree with his conclusion. Which his conclusion was, well, we'll never know what it's like to be a bat because you'd have to be a bat to know what it's like to be a bat. Uh, my argument against that is that we're, especially if we're just talking about mammals, and I think it's easier to restrict it to mammals. We're all mammals, which means that we all evolved from a common ancestor, and we have more similarities than differences. And you see this when you start looking at their brains. So I've looked at many different animals' brains. And although they're different sizes, different shapes, and different parts are bigger than others, the broad structures are the same. We all have two eyes, we have one nose, we have two ears, and so on. And so the sensory systems, kind of to a first approximation, are the same. The major difference is obviously in language. That is, where humans are most categorically different. And we can debate what that has to do with anything. Some people believe that language defines us. For example, that you need words to have the emotions because you wouldn't have the ability to put a label on it. I disagree with that, frankly. I don't think, honestly, for me personally, I have many emotions that I don't have good words for, but I recognize them. If that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I think animals are the same. Now, their sensory capacities may be different in some ways, but I think it's a matter of degree, not kind. So yes, they smell things differently. They may hear things differently
and see things. You described how they visualize things with different amounts of cones than we do.
Right. So, most other animals do not have kind of the full extent of color vision we do because they're what we call dichromats and we're trichromats. It's not the case that other animals see in black and white. That is definitely not true. They see in shades of two colors usually. But does all of that really matter in the end? And I don't think so. I think it's mostly just a matter of degree more than anything.
You talked about trying to understand the sounds that came from your cows. Oh, am I using the right word, cows, here? You talked in the beginning of the book what we're allowed to cow. I meant to bring that up. The differences between all the animals. I don't think they're all cows, are they?
No, I mean, I, as probably most people do, use the word cow to describe all the gendered variations of cattle. Cattle is the proper gender neutral term for all of them. A cow is technically a female that has had a calf only, but I call them all cows.
Yeah, I think that those designations are important, especially today when we're so sensitized about gender terms.
Yeah.
So cattle, your cattle. You talked about trying to understand how they communicate because they definitely make different types of sounds in different situations. And you described a lot of them and it was fascinating to read. And one of the things you talked about is the vocal pitch, where low could imply big and aggressive and high could mean playfulness, something like that. And it just made me smile a little bit. I'm a singer and I'm typically a soprano. But one of the things that frustrates me is in roles for women, the roles for seasoned women, older women, are typically written very low. And the youthful women, the parts are written very high. Now, I can sing it all. I prefer to sing the high. And it's kind of frustrating that most of the roles that are for me today are so low. But it's an interesting thing how we apply traits to the sound of our voice, whether it's high or low.
It is. Yeah. And it's not something that we typically consciously think about either. And I think I think those are to some extent hardwired for the reasons I said, which is, evolutionarily, large animals are going to have lower pitched vocalizations than small animals. Or similarly, within a given species, an adult is going to be bigger and therefore have lower pitch than a juvenile, which is going to have a higher pitch. Um, and so those are just simple biophysical traits of vocal systems that relate to the size of the body. But then we kind of incorporate that into our assumptions and how we think about that and what those mean. And I think that carries through to other animals as well as us.
I'm saving my favorite part of the book for last. And I was thinking about this throughout the entire book. I was wondering if you knew about Ellie Locks and the Gentle Barn and cow therapy. And then you finally spoke a bit about cow therapy and how cows lift you up and how sitting with them is almost a form of meditation. And this is what I love the most. And I think it's something that we're supposed to get from these animals. Slowing down, paying attention. And if we can do that, they can heal. They can heal us, and we can learn a great deal. So I'm glad you got that, and I'm glad you talked about it.
Well, thanks. I mean, it's like I said, for where I live out here in the country, it's somewhat unique. I have many neighbors who have cattle, and they raise them for food purposes. Most of them end up going to auction and end up, on a CAFO in Nebraska, probably. It's not, and like I said, they're my neighbors, and we get you kind of have I have to live with people here, and these get into kind of difficult economic choices that people have to make, and I'm sympathetic to that. And so one of the things that I've done is, just by doing what I do, it kind of shows people, it's like, oh, you know I didn't know that cattle were capable of that. And people come over, other cattlemen come over, and they sit with the cows with me, and it opens their eyes.
Yes, it opens their eyes, and we need more of that. So, as you may know, I am a vegan. I've been vegan for 36 years, and I do like to promote a healthy, whole food, plant diet. And you did say in your book, your intent is not to promote veganism, and I understand that. I live on a planet with mostly omnivores, humans that eat animals, and there are many things I appreciate about people who don't choose to eat like I do. And I want to live peacefully with everyone, but I do want to open eyes. And we have something serious going on the planet today, where we're growing too many animals to feed people. It's not efficient, and the way we do it is cruel, and we're learning that it gives us chronic diseases. La 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 la. That's not what this particular program is about, but I'm just curious, because your intent is not to slaughter these animals that you love and care about. But you mentioned that you do eat occasionally some meat. And for me, who can't understand what any other human thinks, I just wondered, why is that okay?
Yeah, I was expecting you to ask me about this. That's a fair question.
I just want to understand.
Yeah, well, it's okay. So I have been at various forms of vegetarianism to varying degrees throughout my life. Um, and my kind of honest take on this is, for one, I'm against all isms, because I'm not an absolutist. And and so it's like, can you be vegan on Mondays? Does that count? Uh, what if you what you know what if you slip up and have a hamburger once a year? Do you still get to call yourself vegetarian or vegan? And this is kind of at the heart of why I avoid those terms. Uh, to me, it's kind of like AA. It's like if you fall off the wagon, what does that mean? Um, and so my
It
view
means
on
you're
this,
human and we're not perfect.
exactly what I was going to say is that you are not perfect, and you can't beat yourself up about it, right?
Hmm.
We all do
Tomorrow
the
is another day, as they say at Tara.
yeah. When I say I'm not vegetarian or vegan, I'm being honest because I am not absolute about it, and I stop beating myself up about it. Uh, Most of my protein comes from plants, but I mean, look, we have chickens on the farm. They have free reign of where they want to go. We eat their eggs. They have a good life. It's not risk free though. You know, if when you let chickens run free, they get eaten by other
Hmm.
animals.
Hmm.
Um, and this has been probably the most eye-opening aspect of living on a farm, and trying to raise your own food, whether it's vegetables, whether it's eggs, whatever it is. It's damn hard. You try to grow food, everything wants to eat it. Deer are incessant. They are relentless. They will eat everything you plant. uh, and it's a difficult problem. Most people around here hunt the deer, uh, and I've actually kind of had to do it myself because, frankly, they eat the stuff I plant for the cows, and it's like, well, what do you do? Um, Previous owner of the property hunted extensively, and I didn't. And then what happened was the deer population exploded, and again, this kind of comes back to where we started. It's like, you move someplace and you try to do something with the best intentions, and then there are the unforeseen consequences of tinkering with nature. um, there's no there's no free lunch. Even honestly, if you try to eat organic, um, I guarantee you're still consuming animal products. Most
Mm,
organic farmers I know are using bone meal
sure.
and blood meal, for
We do
nitrogen.
the best we can.
Right. And so it comes back to my point: is my goal is having educated choices in the things that we eat and knowing where your food comes from. I think industrialized ag is an easy target, because it commoditizes our food products into widgets, including the animals. Um, but that's easy. And that only has like a paragraph in the end of my book, because I feel it's easier to change people's minds about animals by storytelling, not by moralizing.
And
I'll,
that's
I'll
where
leave.
we're gonna that's where we're
I'll
gonna end it, because we're
yes.
at the end of the hour. It's a perfect place. We can change people's minds by storytelling and also by putting delicious, healthy plant food in their mouths. But Gregory Berns, I really enjoyed meeting you, chatting with you, reading your book, and hearing about your love story with cows, Cowpuppy, an unexpected friendship, and a scientist's journey into the secret world of cows. I hope it is your next bestseller.
Thank you. Thank you. I enjoyed it too.
That's our show for today. Have a delicious week, everybody.